On today's episode, we talk jigs. We ask you which type of jig you would rather use for the rest of your life, a flipping jig, a swim jig, or a football jig, and then we discuss the results. We also talk about working jigs in current and working jigs from the bank. We also discuss the coin flips heard around the world, a dirt cheap Amazon buy that we highly recommend, our favorite ways to cook fish, and more on today's episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk Podcast. If you enjoy listening to this show, you should take a minute and thank the folks over at American Legacy Fishing, because without them, there would be no Tackle Talk. But in addition to giving us the means to produce this show, they also give you the means to acquire the best fishing gear on the market at the best prices around from the best people in the industry. American Legacy Fishing has built their business on integrity and customer service. They're a small Midwestern family-owned shop right there in Evansville, Indiana. They carry all of your favorite brands of rods, reels, line, baits, and more shipped right to your door at the click of a button. And you can actually earn money while you shop, because American Legacy Fishing has one of the best loyalty programs in the country, where everybody earns 1% back on every order they make to use on future purchases. But if you're an American Legacy Elite member, you earn 10% back on every single order, and you get free shipping with no minimums. That alone saves me a ton of money every single year. And on top of that, you can save an extra 5% off with code TACKLETALK5. So great service, fast shipping, family owned, great folks, 5% off with code TACKLETALK5 and an extra 10% back and free shipping for elite members. That is a, if I'm counting here, win-win-win-win-win scenario in my book. So go check them out over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com and be sure to use code TACKLETALK5. Okay, everybody, first up here on the show today, we have to talk about it for a second. It was all the bass fishing world wanted to talk about last week. Bassmaster made its long-awaited ruling on how they would tackle forward-facing sonar in 2026. Now, I will spare you about 50 hours of internet back and forth and whining and pearl clutching and cheater box this, but innovation that. Both sides of the argument get kind of annoying sometimes. And then there's all the people like me, and also probably most of you listening to this show, who are just kind of somewhere in the middle and go, can we just stop all of this, put the rules out, and let's watch fishing? That's the camp I'm in right now. Just tell me what the rules are and I'll watch it. But last year, 2 of the 3 big tournament circuits, Major League Fishing and the NPFL, both released pretty groundbreaking rules regarding the limiting of forward-facing sonar and live sonar. MLF ruled that anglers could only use that technology 1 out of 3 periods each day, and they had to declare which period they were going to use it so we at home could follow along, and the NPFL just outright banned it. Well, Bassmaster, last year anyway, just kind of sat on the fence. They said, look, we'll limit the number of transducers you can have and the number of total inches of screen space you can have, but that's it. Everything else is fair game. Go to town. And this offseason, it looks like they've reevaluated that. So on Tuesday, September 2nd, from the clouds, Bassmaster dropped a press release that read, and I quote, "Beginning in 2026, forward-facing live sonar will only be permitted in up to 5 of the 9 regular season Elite Series events. Which events allow the technology will be determined randomly. The remaining events will prohibit its use entirely, including during official practice. Restrictions implemented for 2025, including limiting anglers to 1 live sonar transducer and a maximum of 55 total inches of screen, will remain in place. The 2026 Bass Pro Shops Bassmaster Classic presented by Under Armour will allow forward-facing sonar since all qualifiers earned their spot under the 2025 rules. To address feedback and preserve competitive balance, BASS will blend tradition and technology, a hybrid schedule that both highlights innovation in bass fishing technology and ensures the traditional techniques remain central to success. BASS will reveal which tournaments will allow forward-facing sonar during a live show on September 4th at 10 a.m. Central Time on Bassmaster.com. Hosts Tommy Sanders, Mark Zona, and Davey Height will learn the results in real time alongside fans. Events will be paired accordingly to the schedule, with a coin flip deciding which one allows live sonar and which will not. The St. Lawrence River, the final stop of the season, will receive its own coin flip, meaning as many as 5 events could end up being non-forward-facing sonar tournaments. And the rest after this is a bunch of fluff and quotes and all that. I'm not going to read that. All the info you need is right there. Bass announced that every 2 tournaments, one will have live sonar and one will not. But the way they're going to choose which one has it and which one doesn't would be left up to, I'm not kidding here, coin flips. And at first, I couldn't believe it. Coin flips deciding anglers' futures, anglers' livelihoods, and the rules of a supposedly professional sport from event to event just kind of boggled my mind a little bit. But once I calmed down and I thought more about it, that may be one of the only truly objective ways to determine it. Leave it completely up to chance and live stream it for the entire world to see so that you know there's no funny business, no ulterior motives. Let the coin decide. So, okay, after I thought about it a little bit, I can live with that. So what they were basically going to do is have a coin flip for the first 2 events, and then a coin flip for the 3rd and the 4th event, a coin flip for the 5th and 6th event, one coin flip for the 7th and 8th, and then one final coin flip for the 9th event at the St. Lawrence River. Each coin flip determines which of those 2 events is going to have forward facing and which will not. So heads was like one event, tails was the other event. Now, fast forward to Thursday, and Bassmaster live streams I don't know, but it felt like an hour and a half stream from the Bassmaster studios with Zona and Davey and Tommy and some special guests that kind of video called in from time to time. And one by one, they flipped the coin. And here is where we ended up after the coin flips. So the first event of the year, Lake Gunnersville, will not have forward-facing sonar at all, which means the second event, Lake Martin, will have forward-facing sonar. The next coin flip decided that the Tom Bigby Waterway will not have forward-facing sonar, and the Arkansas River will have forward-facing sonar. Next coin flip was that Lake Murray will have forward-facing sonar, and Santee Cooper will not have live sonar. Okay, the next coin flip here ruled that the Pasquotank River will have forward-facing sonar, and Lake Champlain will not have forward-facing sonar. And finally, the last coin flip was just for the St. Lawrence River, which decided that the St. Lawrence will have forward-facing sonar. So your 4 events that will not have forward-facing sonar next year, Lake Gunnersville, Tom Bigby Waterway, Santee Cooper, and Lake Champlain. Now, events that will have it will be Lake Martin, the Tennessee River for the Bassmaster Classic, which was never in question. You heard it in that press release. They elected to keep forward-facing for the Classic because that's how everybody qualified. The Arkansas River will have it. Lake Murray will have it. The Pasquotank will have it. And the St. Lawrence River will have it as well. So there's your breakdown of the 2026 Bassmaster Elite Series season. I'm not going to waste your time with all of the opinions one way or the other. I'm just here to give you the news and the facts more than anything with this. I want no part in the forward-facing sonar debate. I think the debate itself is so tribal and emotionally driven and negative at this point that it might be one of the most cancerous things in all of fishing right now. So we're just going to leave it there, but that is the big news out of the Bassmaster Elite Series. We got some new rules and some events with forward-facing sonar and some without it. Okay, everybody, next up here, we have to talk about something that you can buy right now on Amazon for $15 that was one of the best cheap gear buys that I've made in a long, long time. Now, I have to give a shout out to one of the listeners out there. I really, really wish I could find this original message. I can't remember if it was on social media or if it was an email. I have looked and looked through my messages and I can't find it, so I'm so sorry. But there is a listener out there. You know who you are. Please message me after this so that I can thank you again for this recommendation. But I got a random message about, I don't know, maybe a year ago that said something along the lines of, "Hey, Andrew, I know you thought that BKK OCD storage container was super cool at ICAST last year. Check this out." And it was a link to a $15 Amazon organizer that's actually meant for like beads and craft gear and stuff like that. But I'll be darned if it isn't just like a cheaper, smaller version of the BKK OCD storage box. So for reference, that OCD storage box, when it's fully loaded with all of the hooks and gear and stuff that comes with it, it's like $300. Now, I know that you can buy it without the tackle, but I think it's still really expensive for a storage box, even without all the tackle in it. But the idea of that box is very, very cool because it's basically one big box with a bunch of little boxes inside that are easily labeled and slide right in and out. And you can keep all of your terminal tackle in those individual boxes to keep them separate. So you have all your different hooks, weights, all that kind of stuff easily labeled in mini boxes inside one big box. And what makes it even cooler is if you buy BKK hooks, they come in those small boxes already to fit right inside the BKK OCD storage box. So it's like a fully integrated tackle system even when you restock your gear. And when I saw that like 2 years ago at ICAST, I wanted one so bad, but I wasn't about to pay that much for a terminal tackle box. And I also didn't want to commit to just buying BKK for the rest of my life so that they would fit in that storage box conveniently when I restocked on things. Those two things made me hold off on it for a little bit. And I'm glad I did because now I have my own little redneck OCD storage box for a tiny, tiny fraction of the price. Now, does it look as cool? No, it doesn't quite look as cool. Is it as durable? I don't know about that either, but I've also heard a lot of complaints about the durability from those who bought the actual BKK OCD storage box for the price. I've actually heard some people say it doesn't hold up as well as they wish it did. So I took a chance on this cheap Amazon version of it. And so far, it's been awesome. I labeled all of my hooks and weights with brands and sizing and all that kind of stuff. I have 30 completely customizable mini boxes to keep all in that one big, lightweight, clear outer box. And it's not as big as the OCD box. It's not as heavy. So it's easy to throw in my kayak or my crate or my dry bag or whatever I'm taking with me. So I like the fact it doesn't take up as much space. Now, the only downside is going to be that if you have a lot of giant EWG or big worm hooks, like we're talking, I don't know, 6/0, 7/0, 8/0, like big worm hooks, this box is probably going to be a little too small, and I don't really know where the cutoff is on those giant worm hooks as far as what sizes are actually going to fit into these mini boxes. Most of mine fit fine, but just a fair warning, these boxes are not going to hold like your big saltwater hooks or your giant magnum worm hooks or anything like that. But for wacky rig hooks, for drop shot hooks, Nico hooks, nail weights, tungsten weights, bobber stops, drop shot weights, small jig heads, all that kind of terminal that we bring with us all the time. Those things, it has been awesome to store those so far. So I just bring this up as a PSA. If you're like me and you want to organize your tackle better and you thought that BKK OCD storage box looked cool and was a cool idea, but you didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on it, boy, do I have a cheap alternative version for you. Again, courtesy of one of our listeners out there who tipped me off on this. So here's the big thing. If you want this exact box, the one that I bought, the link is going to be in the show description of this podcast. It's also going to be over on our Instagram. So if you go to the Instagram page and you pull up Tackle Talk Podcast on Instagram, click the link in our bio, and that usually takes you to our Linktree link that can send you to a bunch of different places. You can click on the button to go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or a website or YouTube or all those things. I will make this the top link after you click that, so it's really easy to find. I'll label it something like Amazon OCD style terminal box or something. So if you click that link, whether you do it on Instagram or you just do it in the show notes of today's episode, whether you swipe up on, Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening, it will take you to the exact one I bought. Now, you're going to see some options to select down at the bottom when you click that link, different variations of stuff. You know how Amazon does that. I bought the one called Clear-1P. Now, I think that means clear-one piece. I think if you click any of those others, you're going to get sent more than one of these, and it's going to be more expensive. 2P, I think, means two of these boxes. 3P, I think means 3. So if you want multiple of these, then select those and you can get a discount, I'm sure, there. But I selected the clear 1P. And right now, as of the time that I'm recording this episode, it was $15.99 for all 31 pieces that come in that box. So the big outer box and then the 30 smaller individual boxes inside. So it's a great deal. Huge shout out to the Tackle Talk listener that tipped us off on that. We salute you. Well done. But I figured you guys needed to know about that because it's been something that I've really enjoyed over the past couple months. All right, let's keep moving here. The next thing we have today, we have this week's installment of the fishing poll. So for this week's fishing poll, we surveyed you guys about quite possibly the most common, the most popular lure on the planet, a jig. And the question I posed to you was, quite simply, if you had to use one type of jig for the rest of your life, what would you pick? A flipping jig, a swim jig, or a football jig? Now, listen, I can already hear some of you out there. What about a finesse jig? What about a casting jig? What about an archy head jig? What about a ball head jig? We could play that game for an hour. There are tons of different types of jigs, so where do you draw the line? You know, you could throw in bladed jigs. You could throw in hair jigs. You know, the list goes on and on, so I had to limit it somewhere. But I would argue that most of the other true types of jigs, like casting, finesse, ball head, those can all kind of fall into one of those three categories above. Like, I would argue if you say finesse jig, a finesse jig is more of a smaller version of one of those three. So how is the head shaped on that finesse jig? Let's use like Beast Coast, for example. Is it a Beast Coast OW Sniper? Well, yeah, that's a finesse jig, but it's also a football head jig. So pick football in that instance. If you want to talk like Lil Magnum, well, that's a flipping head. So pick flipping jig. You know what I mean? Like, finesse isn't a style of head as much as it is a size of head. And then if you keep moving on, like archy head is just a type of flipping and pitching jig, or a casting jig, or whatever you want to call it. So if you're picking archy or casting, like, those are all kind of in the flipping jig family. So those are your three distinct types of traditional jigs in my mind: an oblong football style head, a hydrodynamic bullet or, shad head swim jig profile, or a giant bucket of all of the other iterations of a jig that aren't either of those two, that are kind of in the flipping and casting territory. So, as is our tradition here on the show with this segment, I will go first. I will give you my take, and then we'll get your opinion as we crack open the results of the listener poll and I get to see them for the first time. So for me, if you're making me choose between a flipping jig, a swim jig, and a football jig for the rest of my life, I can only use one of those type of jigs. I think I might surprise a lot of people here. Extremely spicy take incoming, I think, but I'm taking a football jig. And I can already hear like the audible gasps or upset reactions in your car or, working out or whatever you're doing. You think that I should have taken flipping jig. Admit it. You think that flipping jig should have been the answer. And I would bet a hefty amount of money that that's probably what the majority of you voted for in this poll. I haven't seen it yet, but flipping jig definitely has to be like the odds-on favorite to win this poll. But I'm taking football jig, and here's why. I think the football jig is the most specialized of the three, and I think I can use other baits to fill the void of the other two. So like with a flipping jig, I'm often making short, precise casts at cover, and I want that jig to fall straight down without getting hung up in whatever I'm actually flipping. Pretty simple. Standard jig fishing 101 there. See wood, flip to it. See rock piles, flip to it. See transitions, flip to it. See docks, flip to them. You're just putting that jig around cover. And because of that jig head's shape and the weed guard and all of that, you can get into some nasty places without getting hung up and present that bait to those fish that are clinging tightly to whatever structure or cover that you're fishing. That's the main purpose of a flipping jig for me. Well, I'm going to argue that I can do that exact same thing with a Texas rig. I can peg a Texas rig and keep that weight at the hook and rig a soft plastic of my choice and flip that same cover. And I still have 10,000 different soft plastic profiles to choose from, so I can get any look that I want out of that bait. I can use any weight. I can use a bead or no bead for rattles, and I can get that bait in the same places that I can get that flipping jig. The only difference is no skirt, but I don't think the skirt effort is what gets me bit on a flipping jig. It's placement, it's the amount of kick or flutter on the fall, and its fall rate. And I think those three things can be done with a Texas rig just as well as they can be done with a flipping jig in most scenarios. And you can disagree with that, right? That's okay. That's the fun part for the millionth time here on Tackle Talk about fishing tackle and talking about it. There's 10,000 different ways to skin a cat, and we actually get to sit here and discuss which ones we like and don't like and why. But this is why I didn't pick flipping jig, because I can do with a Texas rig what I did with that flipping jig most of the time. So if you're making me pick a particular type of jig to use for the rest of my life, and I can only use one type of jig, I'll let the flipping jig go because I can make do with a Texas rig. And then I can say the same thing for a swim jig. Another crazy take here, but you can swim other jigs other than a swim jig. I swim a flipping jig all the time. I probably swim a flipping jig more than I swim a swim jig, to be honest, because I just own and use more flipping jigs on the regular, and then I'll be fishing one and I'll get smoked while reeling that jig back in to make another cast, and I'll realize, oh, they want this thing moving. And then I just start chucking that jig out and fast retrieving it, and I'm using that flipping jig like a swim jig, and it works just fine. Now, in weeds, will you notice a little difference? Yeah, but in my opinion, I can get the job done with other gear in this situation too. Now, in this hypothetical scenario we're talking about here, I guess I can't swim that flipping jig because I already eliminated that flipping jig too earlier. So in that case, I'm just going to reach for like a non-skirted option again. So I'm going to grab like a terminal jig head. I'm going to put a plastic on the back of it and go to town. Or you can take like an EWG worm hook, put a flipping weight above it, peg it. So you're basically Texas rigging a swim bait, and then you're just using that if you're really worried about keeping it weedless. I throw a swim bait head 100 times more than I throw a swim jig in my day-to-day fishing. I've said it before on the show. I'm just not a big swim jig guy in general. So those few things made it really easy for me to eliminate a swim jig and move on. So that left me with a football jig, and that's what I'm going to pick, because when I pick up a football jig, I want extended bottom contact with maximum surface area of that jig head making the contact, and a line tie that doesn't scrape. And I've said it before, but when I'm offshore with a football jig or working a steep drop off or a big point with a football jig or something, I oftentimes pick up a heavier jig head than I actually need so that I can really scrape down there and just kind of bulldoze that rock. I'm not too subtle when I'm working a football jig. I'm dropping that jig down in 4x4 and I'm scraping bottom. And I feel like there aren't really many other baits that do that as well as a football jig does. So if you want to go with like a really, really heavy weighted Texas rig or something to get down there and maintain that bottom contact, you can get down there. But when you pull on that line to move it, it raises the weight off of the bottom to complete the tension enough to actually move the bait. So you lose a lot of bottom contact. And the line is way more likely to scratch and scrape that rock and cause abrasion issues and failure than it is with a football jig, whose line tie is more on top of that bait versus down in the rocks with the top of that weight on a Texas rig. Now, you could say, Andrew, throw a Carolina rig, and that's at least a better option, but it's still a different game with a Carolina rig. A Carolina rig has so much space between the weight and the bait itself that it can be harder to keep that actual bait down in the rocks where I want it to be. I want that bait to be right in there with the weight, scraping and causing that disturbance in those rocks, not way behind it. So maybe somewhat controversial take here, but I'm going to take a football jig if I could only choose to throw one type of jig for the rest of my life. Now, here comes the fun part, and I'm almost positive that you guys are going to disagree with me here, but that's half the fun, is seeing and hearing multiple opinions on things. But let's open up the poll results here for the first time and see what you guys said. All right, I am clicking on it now, and wow, that is even more surprising than the last couple times we've done that. I feel like I've said every time that I open this up, wow, that's surprising, and it usually is. This one is like, I would not have guessed this in a million years. This is how you guys were going to vote. So I'm looking at the votes right now. The winner with 41% of the vote was swim jig. I did not see that coming whatsoever. Swim jig wins. Out of flipping jig, football jig, and swim jig, you guys chose swim jig. That is so interesting. I mean, I guess if a bunch of you guys are around a bunch of weeds or you're down south, maybe a swim jig is like way more popular than it is up here. I don't know, but that is very, very interesting to me. In second place with 38% of the vote was flipping jig, and in dead last with 21% was my choice, football jig. The football jig being last does not surprise me. I thought this was going to go flipping jig, swim jig, football jig, but it goes swim jig number 1, flipping jig number 2, football jig number 3. Interesting stuff there. Thanks for voting. Be sure to keep an eye on social media for this week's edition of the Fishing Poll. All right, and finally here, let's crack open some good old mailbag questions to end today's episode. These were submitted over on our website, tackletalkpodcast.com/mailbag. The first one here is from Hunter, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. I'm hoping you can share some tips for fishing jigs in current. Do you lift them off the bottom and let the current carry them until they touch down again, or are you anchoring or using your motor to hold your position and fishing eddies and slack water with them? Or is there something else I'm just not thinking about? I mostly float from point A to point B right now because I don't have a motor currently, and I also don't feel very comfortable with a jig at all, so the current adds another variable. However, I plan to start using jigs more until I feel comfortable with them. Thanks, Hunter." Well, hey, Hunter, thanks for writing in. Good question, and that's a fun one. How do you fish a jig in current? And then you had a couple specific questions, which is good. But short answer is yes, you can do both of what you just suggested. Now, the second way you mentioned is just more traditional jig fishing, right? Fishing at an eddy or slack water so that that jig doesn't necessarily get swept with that current and you can fish that area and spot like normal. That can work for sure, but in my opinion, that's usually not the optimal way to fish an eddy. I tend to lean toward overcasting that eddy and bringing that jig down the current as close to that eddy as you can without actually going in it, and letting the fish that are sitting there in that calm water waiting to ambush bait as it goes by do their thing. Give them what they want. So the line where that main current is touching or going past that eddy, that's your best strike zone. So don't get too close. Keep your distance and make that cast, and make it multiple times and see if anybody's home and waiting to smoke something that goes down that current seam. If that doesn't work, then I will start attacking the actual eddy itself. But what I don't want to do is start in the eddy. Don't start with what you said the first time, which is just like anchoring and then casting directly into the eddy. I don't like to do that. I don't like to just start dropping jigs right on the domes of those fish that are sitting in that eddy. That spooks those fish, that scatters them a lot of times, or it just looks unnatural before I get to fish the actual seam itself, which is way more natural. So that's my normal order of things. Now, in just regular current, I like to actually let that jig tumble or go with the current, just barely ticking the bottom. And that right there is all about weight. The weight of your jig determines whether that jig will just flow downstream with no bottom contact, or go straight to the bottom and start digging, or be somewhere in the middle. And I want that middle ground. So I'm not doing a lot of lifting and falling. I'm doing a lot of keeping that rod tip up just high enough and reeling just slow enough to keep that jig ticking and moving down current, just barely right there at the bottom. So that's my go-to. But again, that's all about the weight of your bait, and that can take some trial and error. So hope that helps. The next question here is from Blake, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I've been a listener since 2020. I know bass fishing is mostly catch and release, but if you were to catch different species like walleye, crappie, catfish, trout, etc., what kind of fillet knife do you use, and how do you prepare it to eat? Here in Texas, we either pan fry or grill them. Thanks for all of your tips and tricks you've provided over the years, Blake." Well, hey, Blake. So if I were to keep some other species of fish, which I do from time to time, I would say like once or twice a year when we go ice fishing, I will keep a bunch of fish and then I'll fillet them and freeze them, and then we've got fish for a while. But you asked what knife and how do I prepare it? The knife that I use is just one of those really cheap Rapala fillet knives that you can get at Walmart or any big box store. Nothing crazy, nothing fancy. You really just want a sharp fillet knife, and you want that flex in it and that kind of wobbliness so that you can make that final cut right there at the tail and you can fillet both sides of the tail. Other than that, I don't do anything crazy with these like electric fillet knives or anything like that. I use a good old fashioned, probably $11 fillet knife from Walmart. Now, how do I cook them? That depends on the different species that we're actually cooking, but I would say like my go-to for most things is to soak those fillets, like the actual raw fillets, in a mixture of like Worcestershire and Frank's Red Hot or some sort of hot sauce, and then some of the spices I just have in the pantry, and I let them soak in that before frying them. And that's my favorite. Yes, I know if you're like a purist, yeah, you lose some of the natural taste, but for like crappie or whatever we're catching around here, saugeye, those kind of things, that like seasoning, sort of little hot sauce soak is great. It gives it a tiny bit of bite, and then you still get that great fried taste when you actually fry it or pan fry it or do whatever you want. But then if we're going to do something like trout, that's a totally different species. The only time I've ever cooked trout, I think I've done it twice, but honest to goodness, I just butterflied them and then I put it in tin foil with some butter and some lemon, and I baked them in the oven, and they were fantastic. So that's it. I am a simple creature. Pan fry it with some hot sauce and spices, let it soak first a little bit, and then I just baked the trout that I caught. Like, that's all I really do when I actually cook fish. All right, the next question here is from Jasper, and he says, "Hi, Andrew. I know everyone says this, but I love the no BS format of the show. My question is, when I'm fishing jigs from the bank, what should I be targeting? Thanks, Jasper." Hey, Jasper, I love it. I guess we're having a full-blown jig episode today. This is great. This time, it's jig fishing from the bank and where to target. And I think this question could even leave out the jig in general and just ask, what do I target from the bank, period? Because that's really what we're going to talk about here. A jig is so versatile, and you're so limited from the bank a lot of times that what I would recommend you look for when you fish a jig is almost the same thing I'd recommend when you're fishing any other bait from the bank. So if I'm fishing from the bank, I'm looking for shade. That's a big deal. Work those shaded areas and those shade lines. I'm looking for retaining walls or like bank composition changes. So if you have a spot that was like all mud bank and then boom, there's a bunch of chunk rock on the bank, work that area really good. But also one of my favorite things to look for on the bank in any like pond or creek or anything like that are outflows. Look for the tubes, look for the pipes. If there's a spot where water is coming in or can be dumped or flushed into that body of water from drainage tubes, from parking lots or pumps or culverts or things like that, fish will be there. Fish the tubes. We call them bass tubes for a reason, because there will almost always be bass around any sort of pipe or tube or outflow or anything like that. Bass aren't stupid. If there is something that comes out of that tube, like any bit of water at all sometimes, it's bringing bugs and bait and nutrients and oxygen and all that kind of stuff, and they hang around it. So look for those type of things, along with any other standard cover, laydowns, docks, stumps, even big pieces of trash or stuff like shopping carts, toilets, microwaves. I mean, you might think I'm joking, but there's a bridge back home that I can think of that had like a big toilet in the water and a big microwave in the water that both sat there forever. And I can't tell you how many fish we caught off of both of those. So it's just something those fish can relate to. It's different in every body of water, but look for those type of things, and I hope that helps. Okay, and our last question here is from Bilal, I think. I hope I said that right. I'm so sorry if I didn't. But Bilal says, "Hey, Andrew, I love the podcast. Thanks for all the info you give us to make us better anglers. I just wanted to ask if the Kickin' Their Bass TV lose combos are good and worth it. Bait casting combo and spinning combos. Thanks for all you do, Bilal." Well, hey, man, thanks for writing in. I don't want to be the guy that rains on your parade here, but I'm going to be honest. I typically don't buy rods or reels that are marketed solely because of a certain person, especially like an online influencer type. And here's why. Typically, that is a royalty or a licensing deal with that influencer. So that company says, hey, we'll put your name on this rod and then we'll pay you like, X dollars from every rod that we sell or something like that. Maybe it's a royalty, maybe it's part of a larger partnership thing, but somehow they're paying that person who is on that rod. And that money has to come from somewhere. And it ain't coming from the money trees at Lew's. I can tell you that. It's coming from you. So what that tells me is that, let's say that rod has a price tag of $179, then it's probably more like a, $120 rod, $140 rod or something that you're paying a premium on because of the person who's attached to it, because they have to pay that person too. The company has to pay for that affiliation. So you're ending up paying for the name more than you're paying for the product. So in this case, the Lew's kicking their bass rods, I don't know this for a fact, but it wouldn't surprise me if they took something like their American Hero combos, which I think like the casting combo is maybe $140, and then they like switch the grips, they switch the color scheme, and then they call it the Kickin' Their Bass TV combo, and they upcharge you to $179. So you're paying $39 extra for it to be a different color and have a different grip on it and have this person's name on it. That happens a lot of times with these type of products, where it may not be a completely new product as much as it is just a version of an existing product that you end up paying a premium for. And that's just my thoughts. But there's also the other side of the coin that says, hey, if you enjoy that guy and his content and you want to support him, well, this is a great way to do that. And you get a cool rod in the process. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But either way, I'm one of those guys, I like to get the best bang for my buck. Usually those type of products aren't it. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you all. As always, go find us on tackletalkpodcast.com. There you can submit your own mailbag questions. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.